Please welcome Peter Templeton, Senior Vice President of Global Marketing Development, USGBC.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this year's International Summit. I hope you all enjoyed this morning's sessions and discussions. In pursuit of a more sustainable world, we know that what we do locally has the power to reverberate globally. While our challenges may be unique to our communities, by coming together, we can learn from one another and gain a better understanding of the many ways the green building movement is strengthening communities around the world. I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing a longtime partner and friend of USGBC and the green building movement. Mary Milmo has over 30 years of green business experience and currently serves as Vice President of Communications and Marketing with UTC Climate Controls and Security. As Vice President, Mary is driving strategic marketing efforts worldwide and helping to shape UTC's narrative in key markets. We are thrilled to have Mary with us here again today. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mary Milmo.
Thank you, Peter. I'm honored to represent United Technologies and Carrier. We're absolutely thrilled to sponsor the International Summit for the 7th year. Today, we bring together building professionals from more than 30 countries to connect, to exchange ideas and best practices, and to learn about the latest green building practices and technologies and strategies. Knowledge sharing helps drive green building growth. And we've seen change in the industry, but we know there's so much more opportunity ahead of us. One of the absolute fastest ways to pique interest and seize that opportunity is to better understand the benefits of green buildings, not just for owners and occupants, but for everyone. So what if I told you that buildings can be good for you, even if you never step inside? And what if I told you that those same buildings can deliver public health benefits that mean fewer deaths, fewer hospitalizations, and less lost time at work and school? We're building on Harvard University's prior CogFX research. We released that at Greenbuild in 2015 and 2016. And the team is back today with a new scientific findings as they continue to build a body of research about the significant impacts that buildings have on health and performance. Today, I'm really honored to introduce my friend, Joe Allen. Joe is Director of Healthy Buildings Program at Harvard University's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And Joe's going to preview sort of the team's latest study that pinpoints the substantial health and societal benefits of the global green building movement. Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Joe Allen.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to present some of our latest research today, and it's going to be a little different than what we've presented in the past. We spent a lot of time in my Healthy Buildings program thinking about the impact of buildings on people inside the four walls of the building. And in this research we're going to share today, we've extended that and started looking what is the impact of buildings on human health beyond the four walls. Thank you. So really, when we start thinking about green buildings and health, there's two aspects of it. And we released a review paper maybe 2 or 3 years ago now that looked at all the scientific literature on how green buildings impact human health. And in that paper we published, we kind of hinted at where we were going with our research, because there are direct and indirect health impacts of buildings on people. For direct impacts, you've heard a lot of our work presented today and in prior years on the cognitive function benefits of better buildings. There's a whole host of other research showing that people in green buildings report greater perceptions of their indoor environmental quality. Many studies show greater objectively measured, better performance of indoor environmental quality in these green buildings, and we've extended that with this work on higher order cognitive function as an indicator or a proxy for productivity. But that's half of the equation. The other half of the indirect benefits, or the population or public health benefits, and it's really a simple story. You've heard today already that buildings consume 40% of our global energy. It's an energy system dominated by fossil fuel use. 80% of our energy globally comes from fossil fuel use. Combustion of fossil fuel leads to the emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases. And importantly, green buildings, through energy conservation measures, can displace some of those emissions of air pollutants. And that has an immediate public health benefit. And that is the focus of the research I'll share with you today. But first, I thought it'd be good to talk about the basics of air pollution. What are we talking about? And why does this matter for health? Well, so we have things like the criteria air pollutants. So the oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, these cause primary effects, but they'll also cause or lead to the creation of particulates. PM 2.5, probably the most infamous air pollutant, or the one we talk about the most. Ozone, formed from reactions of volatile organic compounds and reacting with sunlight in the summer. And then also we have greenhouse gases, right? Things like carbon dioxide, but also methane, which has a global warming potential 30 times greater than carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, which has a global warming potential several hundred times greater than CO2. So these are the types of pollutants we emit in our energy system that relies on fossil fuel combustion right now. So a little bit more about PM 2.5. Well, what is it? Well, PM stands for particulate matter. 2.5 simply stands for the size of the particle. It's airborne dust. And the full scientific terminology, this is it's particulate matter with a mass median aerodynamic diameter less than 2.5 microns. Well, what does that mean? Really, the size is important because if you think about big particles, our body has natural defenses when we breathe in these particles, right? We can capture them in our nasal mucosa and our upper respiratory system. But the size fraction that's 2.5 microns and smaller is really unique in terms of its aerodynamic properties. It can reach into the deepest parts of our lungs, down to the alveoli, which is the gas exchange region. And they're the ones most closely linked with adverse health effects, this particle size, PM 2.5. The study that put PM 2.5 on the map in terms of health effects was done at Harvard, I guess about 25 years ago now, even longer. And it's the Harvard 6-city study. One of the key contributors to that study was my friend and mentor, Dr. Jack Spangler. And the study, one of the key findings is showed in this graph. And it's really simple. If you look at the bottom there on the x-axis, that's PM 2.5 concentrations. On the y-axis is risk of dying early or premature mortality. And you see this linear relationship showing that higher levels of PM 2.5 are associated with increased risk. This formed the basis of the amended Clean Air Act in 1990 and our national ambient air quality standards, which are now at 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And I was just told this morning that in Delhi, it reached 1,100 micrograms per cubic meter just today. And in fact, all the latest research shows that this standard should be even lower. But let's look at a follow-up to the 6-city study. After the National Ambient Air Quality Standards were amended and implemented, air pollution decreased, and what do we see? We saw an immediate benefit to the population just in those 6 cities in terms of a decreased risk of mortality. So it's a key point here is that when we act, we see a benefit, and that impact is immediate. But premature mortality is not the only adverse health effect we're concerned about when we think about air pollution. There are many subclinical effects, like decrements in lung function. There are effects that manifest itself in things like increased visits to the emergency room, or lost school days, or absenteeism from work. New research showing associations between PM 2.5 and dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. A new study by a colleague of mine at Harvard, just published a year and a half ago, showing a link between higher concentrations or exposure to PM 2.5 in the 3rd trimester and increased risk of autism. But here's the dirty secret of outdoor air pollution. You'll read a story about outdoor air pollution every day in a newspaper somewhere. In fact, I guarantee it's in the news in Delhi. It is in the news in Delhi right now. But I will guarantee that you also never, ever see that news story talk about outdoor air pollution penetrating indoors. Depending on the building type, construction type, filtration, ventilation, meteorological conditions, will determine how much of that air pollution enters. But a good estimate, or the median estimate, is about 50% infiltration rate. So let's say you take 50% of the particles outdoors will reach us inside. Well, that's interesting because if you do the simple math, and here's an example where we take an outdoor concentration of 20, 50% infiltration factor, so we say indoors it's about 10. We breathe about 15 cubic meters of air per day. The key number is the one in red up there. We spend 90% of our time indoors. So even if you take a reduction of outdoor air pollution as it comes inside, but we spend so much time breathing the air inside, it turns out that the vast majority of your exposure to outdoor air pollution can actually occur indoors. And in this example, it's 3 times higher. So that's the dirty secret of outdoor air pollution. You never, ever read this in the news stories about outdoor air pollution. So in this new work, we wanted to look at how green buildings can mitigate some of this exposure and contribution to the public health impacts related to air pollution. And I'm joined here by a couple collaborators. I want to point out Dr. Piers McNaughton, Dr. Memo Cedeno, you can raise your hand, and a couple other members of the Healthy Buildings team I think are scattered about. I think I saw Xiaodong out there somewhere. So this is a group effort from my Healthy Buildings team, and we started to quantify these impacts. And so here's the methodology. We looked at 6 countries across the world, and we looked at their LEED certified portfolio. And these 6 countries represent 80% of the LEED certified buildings globally. Then we put them into this tool we developed, we call the COBE calculator for co-benefits of the built environment. And this tool allows us to look at the historic and current anthropogenic emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases associated with the built environment. And here's how it works. It's actually, I think the methodology conceptually is quite simple. So we take the energy use intensity, or EUI, of conventional buildings across these countries. Then we say, well, what is the energy use intensity of the LEED certified buildings? And here we mined USGBC's database, the GBIG database, for this kind of information. And it's pretty stable over the past 16 years. We see that the energy benefits are about 20 to 40%, depending on the building. And here we can do a simple calculation. We can just say, well, what is the economic benefit of that energy reduction? Really simple calculation. But that's been done, and I think it's time to move past that. The next thing we do is we say, well, what are the emissions from those, or the emissions averted from that energy saved? And here we produce things like academics would produce, where we'd say it's X amount of metric tons of CO2 averted, or how many kilotons of some air pollutant averted, but that's, I think, meaningless to most people. So the key next step is you take that emissions averted and you turn it into a health co-benefit. You say, look, if we reduce this amount of air pollution, what are the health benefits from reducing the amount of air pollutants emitted? And that's the magic of this co-benefits of the built environment calculator, is that then we can calculate the health benefits of a portfolio of buildings. So I want to share some of the results, and a little caveat. I'm going to share results today that we shared in a seminar we gave in Jaipur, India, just a couple weeks ago. And I can only share the India results for an important reason. The study has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology. It comes out in the next 2 weeks or so, at which time we'll have a full press release showing the results for all of the countries, but we're under embargo right now from the journal from sharing it. But the India example will be very illustrative. So we took all the LEED certified buildings in India, we ran it through our COBE calculator, and we find that there are $72 million in benefits just from the energy savings. But the interesting part is what's happening on the right of the graph. Here we see $882 million, US dollars, current dollars, of public health benefits that have not been quantified related to these buildings from the health and climate co-benefits. So it's nearly $1 billion, which is very different from that $72 million number, which has been a lot of the value proposition for the buildings so far. Thought of another way, you could think about this. For every dollar in energy saved in India from green certified buildings, there's another $12 saved in public health benefits. And this is a gross underestimate, I guarantee it, because it accounts for fossil fuel combustion, but not extraction, transport, or disposal. It doesn't count for public health impacts from mercury in the environment or ocean acidification. It doesn't account for the direct impacts of NO or NOx and SOx, SO2. It just counts for them as precursors. It doesn't account for all the other health co-benefits of green buildings, like water conservation and waste reduction. So even this number, as staggering as it is still an underestimate. So I want to wrap up by talking about what we call the evolution of green building ROI, or return on investment. So largely the green building movement has been based on a return on investment that's easy to calculate. It's the energy savings. This move to, I think, a market return on investment, thanks to the nice work by Niels Koch and others, and John Mandike likes to talk about the green building value trifecta. So we see there's a market benefit. Our work and others on the cognitive function benefits of green buildings starts to change the value or return on investment to be focused on the people within inside the four walls. And this last piece rounds it all out, because now we see there's a public health benefit. And for me, this is really interesting because now we're talking about wins for all of the stakeholders. It's win, 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 win. It's benefits for the tenant, it's benefit for the developer, it's benefit for the occupier, and there's a public health benefit for investors, municipalities, countries, and all of us and the public. So I'll end by just saying one last thing. We're on a planet right now with a population of 7 billion people, and we are on a race to 9 billion people. If you haven't seen John Mandike's podcast, A Race to 9 Billion, you should check it out. For the first time in history, the majority of us live in urban environments, and 75% of the infrastructure we need by 2050 has not yet been built. So I know that the decisions we make right now around our buildings will literally determine our current and future health. And I personally think that green buildings are part of the solution. So thank you.